And we're back on Shardlight Radio. I'm your host, Mr. Ben, and today we have a special episode, both a special release time and special content. I am very excited to announce that this is the first ever Argent Saga spoilers on Shardlight Radio, and we're going to get into it. So, today we're going to talk about two water cards. One is called Return to Slumber, and the other is called Beckoner of Dreams. But before we get into those cards, I want to, like everybody else who's done spoilers in this set, hit a few points that the team at Argent Saga passed along for me to include with my analysis of these cards. Both of these cards are coming out in Expansion 2 Genesis. This has an October 11th release date and will be legal for Richmond champs. There's 25 cards in this set, just like with Generations, and just like with Generations, some of these cards are not going to appear only in this set. 8 of the cards within each Genesis expansion are cards that will also appear in Set 2 Revelations. So to get real clear on this, the 8 preview cards that appear in Genesis will look the same as the cards that come out in Set 2. This includes the rarity gem. From my understanding, all 8 of the cards that are being previewed are all rares, and they will be different than the Revelations version of the rares, because the Revelations version will have the rare foiling pattern, whereas the Genesis version of these rare cards will have the flat foiling pattern that doesn't have the texturing on it like foil cards from Generations appeared. Also, similar to Generations, 1 out of every 12 packs of Genesis will be foil. Okay. So, the details about the expansion out of the way, I want to get into the two cards that we have today. These are both water cards, Return to Slumber. I want to start there. This is a 4-cost insta-cast spell that allows you to return X +1 target units to the top of their owner's deck in any order. X is equal to the number of destroyed water towers. So for 4 cost, you can get 1 unit of whatever cost off the board on top of the deck. If my water tower and your water tower are both destroyed, potentially this is a 4 cost 3 unit removal spell. Useless stuff first. I really like the card art on this a lot. The way the guy's falling asleep and the mystical lines of the spell coming off of this caster's hands. It's got a real cool aesthetic. I like both this card's art and Beckoner of Dreams. These cards feature what appears to be the same sorceress, and I have positive things to say about the art on both these cards. I also like the flavor text for Return to Slumber, just nap time. It's simple, it's basic, but it fits the card real well. Now, as for the effect, 4 cost for a removal spell does feel a little heavy. If you're spending this on, say, a Silver Watchwoman, it does not feel like you're getting your money's worth for that spell. So really, this is going to be more of a late game, get guys out of the way so you can push for a final attack, or clog up the person's draw, your opponent's draws. As a 4-cost remove 1, it doesn't feel great. That feels kind of expensive. It feels like something like Ancient Serpent's Breath or Tidal Rush would do similar work, but much, much cheaper. Now, once water towers start going down, this spell gets much better. If I'm spending 4 and I'm removing 3 of your units and I put them on top of your deck in whatever order I want. So let's say I get 1 good unit and then there's some garbage unit or less good unit. I can put it on top. So I can do something like remove your Twilight Knight, but not have to worry about you drawing him next turn and him getting quickness and the threat that is. I can bury that threat a little bit further down. So I think there's some legitimate utility in Return to Slumber. It does feel kind of like it's doing something similar to Shards of Winter, which is a similarly costed spell, although it's not quite as good because it doesn't hit the whole board. So it lets you do something that's a little bit better than Shards of Winter, but it has this drawback that in order to really get more overall tempo value out of the card than something like Shards, you've got to be late enough in the game that there's some destroyed water towers. I think this card is playable. I think given that it's instacast and I can do it on my opponent's turn, I can watch you set up your board. Oh, that's going to be real tough to deal with. And then at the end of your turn, nuke up to 3 of your units. It does feel a little expensive. And given how both water champions currently kind of reward you for cycling through a large number of lower costed cards, I'm not sure that there's going to be a 3-of place for this in the meta right away. But I do think this is a card that's going to see some play. And I would be surprised if, given that we know that there's discussion about ways to take out towers that doesn't involve straight up being a combat deck, that if this pairs with a spell that lets you pop a tower, then play this spell. So in the meta as it stands, I think Return to Slumber is a viable option depending upon how the meta shakes out as a replacement slot for a Chronostasis or a Shards of Winter in your deck. I think if we eventually get spells that allow you to take out specific towers without it having to be reliant on having that combat push, this spell gets even better. If you can do like a full water control deck where all I'm doing is playing spells and not really interacting with you, it'll be kind of as annoying as what Ergon was doing, but that's sort of the deck where I feel like Return to Slumber really slots in. Something that wants to be slow, push to the late game, and make life miserable for the opponent. Moving on to the Beckoner of Dreams. This is a 5-cost, 2,000 power unit that also has the tribe tag Mystic. There is an arrival ability on this card. Expel any number of spells with Shard Drain from your discard zone. Take control of target unit with cost equal to the number of spells you expelled. I love this card. The card art's really cool. It's like I said, it's the same caster from the Return to Slumber card, only instead of putting a dude to sleep, she's got a dragon in mystical chains on the art. And I know the art doesn't affect how good the card is. It doesn't mean anything in terms of playing the game, but I really like the art. Her flavor text, none could resist her calling. I 100% guarantee I'm going to play games where I play this card and I'm going to say that flavor text as I take your unit away, and I'm gonna love it. Now, is it actually good? And we have to consider this is the 5 slot, so it's going up against cards like Ayakuma Juggernaut. Now, the Juggernaut is a great blocking card. This card feels like it might do kind of a similar thing, but it feels much more aggressive than the Juggernaut. So first of all, to get the value out of it, 2,000 power for a 5-cost unit is not great. That's not what she's in your deck for. She is in your deck for her Arrive ability, and it requires you to expel spells with Shard Drain from your discard zone. Now, there are 2 very good spells with Shard Drain. Ancient Serpent's Breath is maybe the best spell in the game currently, and Tidal Rush is an absolutely respectable spell that is fine to put in your deck. Both of these spells have Shard Drain on them, and you're probably going to need to run them as 3-ofs if you actually want to be able to get a decent sized unit. Is this card bad if you don't get a 6-drop with it? No, I don't think so at all. I think if you can play a couple copies of Tidal Rush, maybe a couple copies of Ancient Serpent's Breath, and then you play your 5-drop and steal your opponent's 5-drop, or steal their 4-drop, or steal some problematic unit that you were having difficulty getting to, that all seems really good. Now, expelling the spells is a fairly high cost. That means you're not going to be able to fish them back out with Mayu later, and it may put you in a position where you're kind of hurting. And given that the water decks are running some water decks are running things like the statue at Argent Tower or whatever it's called to recycle stuff out of the KO pile back into the deck and reuse them. You can't disregard the fact that you're expelling stuff, even if it's being expelled from your KO pile, which means it's probably been used. The other thing I really like about this is one of the issues that I have in my Jillian deck is I often find myself flirting with the hand limit turn after turn, and it can be frustrating where it feels like I'm playing spells for less than maximum value because I just don't want to have to discard them. Well, if I'm in a position where I have to discard something and I can discard a Tidal Rush, and then next turn that makes my Beckoner of Dreams big enough, or that gives, not big enough, it doesn't affect her size, but it makes her Arrive ability big enough that that one extra discarded card lets me take your biggest unit, then I don't feel bad at all about discarding a card from my hand. I think both of these cards put a little bit of late game pressure into blue. It is going to allow water to stave off being overrun, which to some degree water is already pretty darn good at slowing down opposing aggro decks or board-centric tempo decks. So these are tools that are in a way a little bit redundant considering what water already does, but if we are going to talk about the various factions as having team identity, both of these cards are very on brand for what water's trying to do. I think the cards look great. I'm excited to play with both of them, and I think both of these cards are going to have a home in my Jillian deck. What I've been kind of thinking about is trying to get that Voidfire Desolation and doing some kind of red-blue Jillian Corona deck and have all these big crazy spells that do damage without having to necessarily fight with you fairly on the board. not knowing what the rest of Genesis looks like, it's a little bit difficult to really put that deck together, but that's kind of the idea that I think I'm going to go at first when this set eventually comes out on October 11th. So thank you for joining me on this special episode of Shardlight Radio. It's been an absolute blast to be able to reveal a couple of cards and be part of this game that I love so much in that way. So thanks to the team over at Argent Saga for giving me this opportunity, and thank you to the listeners for letting me ramble about how cool these cards are for so long. Until next time, go win some games.